The 1867 law most relevant to Black Americans was not a single law, but a series of Reconstruction Acts passed by the U.S. Congress in March 1867, following the Civil War. These acts were pivotal in laying the foundation for civil rights and political participation for formerly enslaved African Americans. Here's a detailed breakdown. Background: after the Civil War, 1861-1865, the U.S. entered the Reconstruction era, a period aimed at rebuilding the South and integrating formerly enslaved people into American society. President Andrew Johnson's lenient approach to Southern states sparked backlash in Congress, especially among radical Republicans who sought stronger protections for freedmen. The first Reconstruction Act, March 2, 1867. This was officially titled An Act to Provide for the More Efficient Government of the Rebel States. Key provisions: division of the South into military districts, the 10 former Confederate states, excluding Tennessee, which had already ratified the 14th Amendment, were divided into 5 military districts. Each was governed by a Union general with broad powers to maintain order and oversee the transition to civilian government. Readmittance requirements: states had to hold new constitutional conventions, create new constitutions that guaranteed black male suffrage, ratify the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S., including former slaves. Voter registration: the military commanders were tasked with overseeing voter registration. All black men and white men who had not participated in the Confederacy were allowed to register and vote. This was the first federal law that directly protected black male voting rights in the South. It marked a major shift in American policy. Black men could now vote and hold office in former Confederate states, many for the first time. Over the next few years, over 600 black men were elected to public office during Reconstruction. Other related acts: 1867-1868. Congress passed several supplementary Reconstruction Acts, clarified voter registration processes, required majority approval for new state constitutions, strengthened military authority over Southern governments. Impact and legacy: the acts revolutionized Southern politics, empowering millions of formerly enslaved individuals. They paved the way for the 14th Amendment, citizenship and equal protection. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, banned racial discrimination in voting. However, Reconstruction ended in 1877, and white supremacist groups and Southern Democrats would later roll back many of these gains through Jim Crow laws, disenfranchisement, and violence. Legacy: the black political leaders who emerged, and what happened after the initial Reconstruction laws of 1867. Rise of black political leadership. 1867-1877. The Reconstruction Acts of 1867 opened the political door for African Americans, especially in the South. For the first time in U.S. history, black men could vote, run for office, and shape legislation. Notable black leaders. During Reconstruction: Hiram Revels, Mississippi. First African American U.S. Senator, 1870. Took the seat formerly held by Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president. Blanche K. Bruce, Mississippi. First black man to serve a full term in the U.S. Senate, 1875-1881. Robert Smalls, South Carolina, former slave who became a Civil War hero, elected to both state and national offices, including 5 terms in the U.S. House. Joseph Rainey, South Carolina, first African American to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, 1870. More than 600 African Americans served in state legislatures and local governments across the South during Reconstruction. Backlash and the end of Reconstruction. While these advancements were historic, they were met with intense resistance. White supremacist violence groups like the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, formed to terrorize black voters and leaders. Assassinations, beatings, and economic coercion were used to suppress black political power. The Compromise of 1877, a disputed presidential election, led to a backroom deal. Rutherford B. Hayes became president in exchange for withdrawing federal troops from the South. This ended Reconstruction and began an era of white Southern redemption governments. Aftermath: the rise of Jim Crow. From the 1880s onward, Southern states passed Jim Crow laws enforcing racial segregation, imposed poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses to suppress black voting rights, used violence and intimidation to maintain white supremacy. Despite the gains made by the 1867 Reconstruction Acts, the systemic dismantling of black rights would last until the civil rights movement of the 1950s-60s. Legacy of the 1867 Acts. Today, while Reconstruction was short-lived, its laws had lasting impact. They set the precedent for federal protection of civil rights, influenced the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, inspired generations of black activists, from Frederick Douglass to Martin Luther King Jr., long-term consequences, constitutional transformations, and modern implications of the 1867 Reconstruction Acts. Constitutional transformation. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. While not passed in 1867, these amendments were vital components of the Reconstruction framework and were enforced through the Reconstruction Acts. Third Amendment, 1865, abolished slavery throughout the U.S. legal foundation for later civil rights protections. Fourth Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S., including formerly enslaved people, guaranteed equal protection under the law, targeted the black codes, and aimed to dismantle race-based legal restrictions. 15th Amendment, 1870, prohibited denial of voting rights based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This was the direct constitutional support for the voter protections introduced in the 1867 Acts. These amendments fundamentally redefined the relationship between the federal government, the states, and individual citizens. Legal and political legacy of the 1867 Acts. 1. Birth of federal civil rights power. The Acts marked one of the first times the federal government overrode state authority to protect individual rights, especially voting rights. This idea would re-emerge in Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, Fair Housing Act of 1982. Legal precedents. Though weakened by later Supreme Court rulings, e.g., Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, the principles of equality and protection in these Reconstruction laws were revived in the 20th century. Model for future Reconstruction. The military occupation and reformation of the South were seen as controversial, but they established a model for rebuilding nations after internal conflict or systemic oppression. Modern implications. Black political participation. The gains made in the 1867 Acts were reversed post-Reconstruction, but the precedent of black voting rights and representation inspired future generations. Civil rights, jurisprudence, modern. Interpretations of the 14th Amendment, especially equal protection, are rooted in the Reconstruction era. Key cases include Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, Loving v. Virginia, 1967, Shelby County v. Holder, 2013. 3. Continuing struggles. The rollback of voting rights protections in recent years echoes some of the challenges faced after the end of Reconstruction, making the lessons of 1867 highly relevant today. The 1867 law's place in American history, the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, marked the first true attempt to build a multiracial democracy in the U.S. empowered millions of formerly enslaved people to exercise citizenship and vote, were eventually undermined by systemic racism. But their ideals lived on and inspired future civil rights movements. They were not perfect, but they represent one of the boldest efforts in American history to enforce equality through law and policy.